When I grew up in Brooklyn, I went to a modern Orthodox yeshiva called Yeshiva Flatbush. And we studied Torah, we studied Chumash, we studied the 5 books of Moses with an 11th century French commentator called Rashi. And the way we were taught this commentary was we were always asked, what's bothering Rashi? So when I was really little, I was like, well, what's wrong with Rashi? Like, does Rashi have a stomach ache? Like, what's bothering Rashi? But the question really was, what doesn't make sense in the narrative? What's theologically problematic? Where is there a problem in the grammar? Like, what's generating Rashi's commentary? And just so you know, for those of you who don't know Rashi or what's bothering Rashi, Rashi wrote a commentary on the entire 5 books of Moses and most of the Talmud. So besides being a vintner, he was very productive. Now, it's not that I'm comparing myself to Rashi, but there's been something that's really been bothering me in this parsha that I want to explore with you. Something that's just not sitting right. And it happens during Jacob's deathbed scene. Again, we're talking about Jacob's deathbed scene. And to go back to the meditation that I did with you, it's when he blesses Joseph's sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So here's what happens. First, Jacob blesses Joseph, saying, "The God in whose presence my father walked, Abraham and Yitzchak, the God who has tended me ever since I was born until this day. Elohim asher hitalchu avotai lefanav, Abraham v'Yitzchak, Elohim haro'eh oti me'odi ad yom hazeh." And then he extends the blessing to Joseph's sons, saying, "The messenger or the angel who has redeemed me from all evil, may he bless these lads. Hamalach hagoel oti mikol ra, yivarech et hane'arim." But wait a minute. Did God really tend to Jacob? And when was Jacob redeemed from all evil, from Ra? If you think about his life was actually full of Ra. It was full of evil. It was full of suffering. As a teenager, he dupes his father, pretending to be his twin brother Esav. Then Esav wants to kill him. Then he meets his beloved Rachel, but his father-in-law dupes him and replaces Leah with her sister, so that his wedding night isn't spent with his beloved. Then, tragically, his daughter Dinah is raped, and his sons massacre all the men in the town where she was raped. And then Rachel, his beloved wife, dies in childbirth with their second son, Benjamin. And then Jacob plays favorites, and his sons begin to hate each other. And Joseph, his favorite son, disappears because his other sons, Joseph's brothers, throw him in a pit and plot to kill him, and ultimately he is sold into slavery. But Jacob believes that he's been torn apart by a wild animal, and he spends years grieving. So does this sound like he was tended to by God? Does this sound like an angel redeemed him from all badness? And it's not like you could say, all right, all these things happened to him, but he was really happy. But the Torah actually gives us a window into his feelings. He's furious when he discovers he's married to Leah instead of Rachel. He's terrified of meeting up with his brother Esav. He's furious when his sons massacre the men of the town of Shechem. And he is totally heartbroken when he discovers that Joseph has been supposedly killed by a wild animal. This man, our forefather, this man Jacob, who's called Israel, who is our namesake, he has suffered. In fact, when he's introduced to the Pharaoh, and Pharaoh asks him how old he is, he says to Pharaoh, "The years of my sojourn on this earth are 130. Few and evil have been the years of my life." Ma'at v'ra'im hayu yemei shnei chayai. So few in evil, he describes his own life, right, as evil. Our forefather Jacob has lived a life of suffering, disappointment, fear, and pain. So where is that God that tends to him? Where is the redeeming angel? Is his blessing some kind of weird, toxic positivity? You know those people who, like, you ask how they're doing and the world is on fire and they say, oh, everything's great, and you're like, what are you talking about? Maybe his life really was as horrible as the Torah describes. And maybe at the same time, we should believe that an angel redeemed him from all badness. But how could they both be true? So let me try and make sense of this paradox that really can't be made sense of. Maybe there's something here that didn't relieve him of his suffering, but comforted him in his terrible suffering and loss. Could it be that his sense of divine presence that he so beautifully articulates in chapter 28, when he wakes up from a dream about angels going up and down a ladder and says, God was in this place and I did not know it. Could it be that his sense of divine presence didn't take away his suffering, but helped him feel less alone in it? Jacob was a twin, but he and his brother were enemies. Maybe in the face of the loss of his relationship to his brother, he was twinned instead with a spiritual presence that kept him from feeling utterly alone in all that he faced. Maybe it was that presence that gave him a sense of being tended to, even in his unending grief. So even though God didn't rescue him, not at all, God didn't relieve him from his suffering, maybe there was a sense of presence and even a sense of greater purpose that made his suffering bearable. Maybe it was that angel that he wrestled with back in Genesis 32 that accompanied him throughout his life, so that even in his worst moments, he was comforted by a twinning presence. So that some of the badness of his experience was softened. Could it be? I don't know. I don't want to downplay his intense suffering, or anyone's for that matter. But I want to reflect for a moment on my own experience, because I relate to Jacob in this way. Some of you know that in February 2018, my beloved daughter Shira was diagnosed with a brain tumor and she almost died. She went through several surgeries, 6 cycles of intense chemotherapy, like the most powerful kinds of chemotherapy that exist, and 3 weeks of radiation, and then after all that, immunotherapy. What made all the difference for me during my daughter's illness, and I hope for her, was being accompanied. I was accompanied by friends, family, by community, and I felt as my mandate that I was to be by her side no matter what, day in and day out. I knew exactly what my purpose was in those months. I understood my job. It was twofold. It was to do everything I could to save her life, to get her the best medical care possible, but my second task was no less urgent. It was to accompany her the entire way, from beginning to end of that nightmarish journey. To ensure that she was not alone and did not feel alone. I have never felt such a deep sense of purpose in my entire life, either before then or since then. But in those months, it was absolutely clear I was there to accompany. And accompaniment, I believe, makes all the difference. It makes the difference between suffering and trauma. Because one is traumatized, not simply because one suffers, but because one is abandoned in that suffering, because one is alone in that suffering. Sarah Payton, who I quoted a few weeks ago when I talked about Joseph and his trauma, a neuroscience educator, says what determines if something is trauma is to what extent we are accompanied by warm understanding during or after a traumatic experience. She further says that bringing accompaniment back to our wounded selves is the key to healing brains that have been fragmented by traumatic experience. In other words, what defines trauma for her is being alone in the suffering, being alone in the terror, being alone in the shock. Is there a responsive presence that has helped us feel less alone in moments of terrible suffering? So maybe it's not that Jacob was rescued by an angel. Maybe the angel didn't relieve him or redeem him from all that was bad, but helped him carry that badness. The Torah makes it clear, as we close this difficult book, this book of seemingly unending unending badness, we look forward to a different kind of book, to Exodus, to Shemot, which we will discover is also a book of crisis, of Ra, but it's a collective crisis where people stand up for each other and accompany one another instead of fight over being a favorite. There's something different here. Aaron and Moshe support each other. Miriam watches over her baby brother when her mother puts him down by the reeds of the Nile so he won't be killed by the Egyptians. The daughter of Pharaoh comes and finds the baby Moses and adopts him, which is maybe the ultimate gesture of accompaniment. The midwives, who some say are Hebrew and some say are Egyptian, accompany laboring Hebrew mothers and refuse to kill their children. But what about us? Here we are in times of great peril, plenty of badness to go around, unending suffering. We are what we have witnessed this week and the past few days, the absolute horror on the West Coast of our brothers and sisters in California losing their homes and businesses and schools and their entire world. Where's that angel to relieve the Ra, to relieve the suffering? We are living at a time of so many nightmares. We went through a pandemic, and to this day, whenever I'm in a service and I see people in front of me, I'm so happy and grateful, right? What a time of isolation. Our people were massacred on October 7th. Innocent civilians are killed every day in Gaza, the West Bank. We're living through an intensifying climate crisis. I think the message of the Torah is saying to us that this is a time of accompaniment. This is a time that we have to show that we're there for each other. Some of us might do it with money, by contributions, and some of us might do it by protesting in the streets, and some of it might do it by accompanying an undocumented immigrant so that they won't be taken off the streets and sent back to a place that is dangerous for them. The purpose is clear, as these times become more frightening than ever. We're called upon to be accompanying angels, each one of us, for the people that we love and for the strangers amongst us. May we have the strength to do so.